Hey friend, welcome to Authentic Performance, the podcast. My name is Nat and I'm your host. At Authentic Performance, our mission is to provide education and advocacy for all athletes, developing awareness surrounding identity, purpose, and health, so athletes can live well beyond their sport. This week, we have Dr. Peter Inserillo on the podcast talking about his role as a physical therapist and sports performance coach. Peter also played soccer at the Division I level and shares about what his transition out of sports looked like, as well as how he's continued to stay involved in the industry. One of my favorite things we got to talk about was the recovery process for injured athletes, even touching on the mental barriers that athletes face when returning to sport. I'm so excited to get to share this conversation with you and hope that you will take away some of the valuable mindset tips Peter shares and how to improve performance as a whole. Thanks for being here. All right, I want to welcome our guest today, Peter Inserillo. I'm so excited to have you and just dive into this conversation. So with that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, maybe how you're involved in sports, what you do now, etc.?
Of course. Yeah, thanks for having me, Natalie. So I was originally born and raised in a small town in upstate New York. I grew up playing a multitude of sports, including baseball, soccer, hockey, a little bit of football, but not too much. And the last sport that I picked up was soccer. That was around 11 or 12 years old. And sure enough, that was the one that I ended up excelling in the most. So I was really blessed to get a scholarship at a Division I school. And that's what brought me out to Connecticut. I played 3 years of Division I soccer at University of Hartford and am now a doctor of physical therapy who is owning and operating his own practice in Farmington.
Sweet. That's so awesome. Can you tell us a little bit more about your experience as a D1 athlete? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, it was awesome. I really felt like I was living a professional's dream, except having to go to classes. But I loved it. I loved the structure. I loved the discipline. I loved the hard work and the camaraderie that the team built. Um, it was a really special experience for me because it did a couple of things in my life. I mean, number one, it kind of pushed me away from the game that I loved so much, because if anyone knows what it's like to play on a Division I team, it's really cutthroat, it's really competitive, and it's very unforgiving. You make one mistake and it will haunt you for weeks, and it's like no one's going to forget about it. And no matter how many good things you do, it's always the mentality from the coaching staff, like, what have you done for us lately? So it was, really emotional. It was exhausting, because I already was an underdog coming into the squad. I was this kid from a small town in New York, going against guys who were competing on their international teams, and it was really hard. It was really hard to say the least. But the best thing that I got out of it, unfortunately, it took me a few years after being removed from it, but it really taught me that when you're going through resistance and when you're really struggling in life, that means that you're doing the right things. For me, I had a dream of playing professional soccer. I ended up going to a couple of combines, and in college, things got hard. And when I was finally starting to break through, more obstacles came about, and I took it as a sign saying that this wasn't it. And now I know, 8 or 9 years after that, the resistance is a sign that you're on the right track and that you just have to keep pushing a little bit harder until you get through it.
Yeah, I always like to say, like, the way to growth is being uncomfortable, and it's not fun at all, but that's how you know that you're, building character and developing for what's to come in the future, because obviously it sounds like you learned stuff there that now you can apply in your life.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of segue into more of what you do now. So, what first sparked your passion for physical therapy and sports performance?
Truthfully, I wanted to be an athletic trainer when I was in high school. I had the opportunity to take like this elective course, and it was pretty much the athletic trainer taking us through like taping and, really low level, injury protocols. But I loved it. I just loved being, in the training room. I loved like being able to work with athletes. And as I began to do my college research, I found out how little they make and how much they work. So that deterred me quite a bit. So I decided that physical therapy was pretty much the next closest thing that would allow, a good schedule and decent pay. I ended up doing a couple of internships in strength and conditioning. I was a performance coach and strength and conditioning coach since 2013. And I did that all the way through PT school. So I was able to, use those skills and apply them when I was in school in different clinical settings. But I always loved sports. It was always an outlet for me. My greatest heroes growing up were all sports figures, and I identify myself as an athlete. Even to this day, I just love the mentality and the leaning into the hard times, kind of like what you were referring to before. I just love it. I love being uncomfortable. I love having the opportunity every day to push yourself to some new limit.
Yeah, and that's so cool too that you get to take that and now, like, playing at a very competitive level, and then now still, training towards a goal and having something to kind of like get that, um, I guess, competitiveness, or like a lot of the things that we learn in sports. It's really hard when like it's all of a sudden gone, but it sounds like you found a really good outlet that's like similar, obviously not the same intensity of like playing an organized sport at a Division 1 school, but just it that transition can be tough if you don't have anything. So it's cool that you get to kind of stay involved and keep that going. So can you tell us more about your role with Relentless Performance? What is it that you do? Yeah.
Of course. So Relentless Performance is my company that was founded pretty much the day I found out I passed my boards exam. So it's a physical therapy and sports performance clinic in Farmington, Connecticut. I'm the owner, operator, so I wear all the hats. We're still a pretty small company. It's just my fiance and I running it. So we just tackle it hand in hand every day. She is a great strength and conditioning coach. She mostly deals with our general population clientele. I'm the only doctor of physical therapy on staff, so I do all of the rehab, and then I mostly do the sports performance coaching. So how we delineate that is really if you're an athlete of any age who is playing or competing in an organized league or sport, that's kind of what I take over. And it's great. Our company has grown to over 100 active clients and patients. Um, and we're already looking for a second space. So I mean, we're just really blessed. We take a lot of pride in what we do, and we do a lot of things that I think our competitors don't do. And I think that's really what's starting to separate us and what's starting to make Relentless more of a household name in this area.
That's so cool. I love it. So part of the reason why I'm just so excited to have you on specifically is that injury piece of that's a lot of what you do in like physical therapy, like helping with rehab and that kind of stuff. And since that's a big piece of my story, and I had several different physical therapists, I'm so intrigued to hear kind of your input. So we'll start off with just what are some of the most common injuries you treat, and are there practical ways that athletes can prevent some of these injuries?
I would say the most common type of injury that I see are overuse injuries in youth athletes. The majority of the clientele that I specifically see are high school and college athletes. And I do have about probably a little less, somewhere in between 8 to 10 middle school athletes. which is cool. But I often see like Sever's disease, Osgood-Schlatters disease, a lot of those overuse injuries that, cause irritation in and around growth plates. It's really common in kids that age who are competing in high level sports. I mean, where we are in Hartford County, there is a huge youth sports presence, which is really cool. But also it creates a lot of single sport dependency, and there's a big conflict right now in the youth sports industry where a lot of parents and coaches, they want athletes to be really specialized early on, and in reality they're missing a huge piece in athleticism by allowing the athletes to play different sports that require them to move their bodies in different ways and just have different muscular and neuromuscular demands.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear because I know I also grew up in a really small town and I played three sports. It wasn't until I went to college and played just basketball and was only ever doing basketball and definitely doing too much of it without adequate recovery that I saw an injury. I mean, when I was playing three sports, I had barely any injuries in middle school, high school. So that's interesting. Like the specialization, it seems like it's getting more common. Um, what would you say the role of education plays in preventing any kind of injuries?
Definitely quite a bit. I think more so than the education is access to facilities and to coaches. I'm a firm believer that a lot of these injuries can be mitigated by just basic movement competency and strength, a proper balance of strength. And probably, the most common thing that I address when I'm working with a new patient that falls into the category that I just mentioned is just mastering basic movement patterns, because oftentimes when you return back to the foundations and really like basic exercises, they'll have no pain with it, and in reality they're going to get stronger by just doing those simple things. I think as a society, but mostly in the strength and conditioning industry, unfortunately it's filled with a lot of egos and a lot of people who they want to sound smart and important, and that's fine and great, but at the end of the day, we're there to serve the people that are in front of us, and the best way to do that is just finding the deficits that they have and just plug in the holes. I mean, it's really that simple.
Okay, so I want to shift a little bit into kind of the mental side of it because I'm sure with injured athletes, you also probably see the battles that they're facing mentally. Um, what kind of mental struggles do you see with the injured athletes you're treating, whether they are trying to return to sport or are maybe taking it, to be the end of their career? What kind of mental situations have you experienced?
Hmm. A few actually. I think the first one that I'll speak to is really just regaining their confidence in participating in certain movements and like trusting their bodies and trusting the work that they've put in to be able to do those things again. There's when we have certain injuries and when we work with certain health practitioners, there becomes like this fear avoidance where they become afraid to do certain things because they've been told that they shouldn't do it or they're not ready to do it. um, and for me, I'm a big data guy. I'm a numbers guy. So everything that I test and everything that we do in our facility is data driven. So we use, force plates, we use timing gates, we use VBT systems. And I think the best thing that I can do for the athletes in that particular circumstance is showing them the data, showing them the improvements that they've made, and now just encouraging them and just being a supporter for them and being like, you've worked to be able to do this, it's time to try it. It's time to go and just go for it. Just do it. The second piece to it, I think, it comes down to uh, identifying when resistance in life is pushing you forward or when it's holding you back. In this area that we're in, it's a very wealthy suburban area. So I'm not working with kids that they don't have a support system at home, or they don't have access to food and water, and they don't have access to organized sports. Like, it's a blessing and a curse, but most of the kids, if not all of the, let me rephrase, all of the kids that I work with, they come from good families. They come from, you know, a pretty wealthy, supportive system at home. So the biggest thing for me when they come into the facility is getting them comfortable with pressure, getting them comfortable with resistance, and getting them comfortable being really uncomfortable, because they have not experienced that really. And I can tell right off the bat by just looking at how hard they work. They think they're working hard. In reality, I see another 40 or 50% that they can probably give, but they've never had to access that part of their brain. For me, like, sports was my outlet for a lot of different traumas that I've had. So even to this day, I'm one speed. Like, I'm all in, or I'm not in at all. So um, that for me is the fun part, because I love, like, being able to pull that out of them and then, like, seeing it come to fruition on their own, like, independently. It's just so cool.
Do you see with like just performance training as well that like I mean obviously there's a big mental piece. How does that differ, I guess, from an injury, um that like dealing with like the mental challenges of an injury versus someone who's just working on performance?
Yeah. The biggest thing that I discuss with athletes who are under my care in a rehab setting is that we are no longer talking about sports. We're no longer just talking about you being able to play again. We're not talking about you scoring goals again. We're not even talking about you utilizing your skill set to get into college or whatever it might be. We're just going to talk about life, because one of the biggest reasons why I decided to do physical therapy instead of other routes, and trust me, I had many jobs before I even started PT school. The biggest thing that I bring it back to is life. Getting injured as an athlete is the one and only perfect example of a setback in life, no matter how you chop it up. There's going to be an immediate hurt or an immediate pain. There's going to be a mental and physical breakdown immediately after. And then you come to the fork in the road where you decide what is going to be your next move. If you go left, then you're going to be leaving a lot of opportunities on the table, and you're likely going to sacrifice some big pieces of your life that you're probably going to regret later on. Or dare you go to the right and challenge yourself and push yourself and defy whatever limitations, self-imposed or externally imposed, and bounce back. I mean, it's just, fortunately, I've never had any major injuries in my soccer career. um, but again, like, the traumas that I had from childhood all the way through college, I mean, those were my obstacles, and those were really, how I was able to develop this sort of mentality that I like to bring to work every day.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like you're talking about people who don't go back to sport, or do you ever work with athletes that come in and say, I don't want to continue playing, but I want to just heal, or do you primarily just work with the people that are transitioning back into sport?
Yeah, good question. I primarily work with the latter, and that's simply because we're a cash-based practice. So we really only work with people who are really willing to invest in their own health and in their own future. I worked corporate physical therapy I lasted 6 months out of college, and I hated it. I hated the insurance model. I hated how much they were restricting what I can do with my patients. And I just hated how much yellow tape it created, when in reality, it's not even helping the patient. It's more visits. It's sometimes even more money out of pocket. It's not one-on-one attention. It's a really poor deliverable of a home exercise program. And the biggest thing that I hated about it was that the expectation was that the person is discharged as soon as they're back to their baseline. And in reality, their baseline was not good enough in the first place if that's what happened that caused you to come see me. So in our model, we're cash based. So automatically that filters out a lot of people, which is okay for me. Like truthfully, I want to work with people who are hungry. I want to work with people who are inspired. I want to work with people who have a bigger goal that they're even afraid of, and that's why they're coming for help because they know they can't do it on their own.
That's so interesting because I mean, I did go through that kind of the more um corporate physical therapy
Hmm.
situation with my injury, and I noticed all of those things that you're saying. Like I would show up like I want to get stronger. I don't just want to heal. I want to, not have this happen again. I want to,
Yeah.
improve in all these different areas and get that personal, one-on-one thing like you're saying. And it truly, it's hard to find that. Unfortunately, I was going through several physical therapists, partially because of moving states, and but also just because I didn't feel like I was getting that full experience, which I think is awesome that you guys are providing that, because it seems like there needs to be more in that injury um, transition and healing process.
Yeah, with us, you're never done. If you're discharged from physical therapy one-on-one care, then the next step is transitioning into one of our many coaching programs. Whether that's in person or whether it's fully remote, like you're never done. This is never something that you can say that, all right, I did my rehab, I'm good to go. I'm just going to go right back to my old habits. Like that's just not how we operate,
Yeah.
and that's an expectation that's set from the very beginning. I'll tell someone, this is where we are in terms of your plan of care, and we're never going to be done. I mean, there's always going to be room for improvement from a mobility, flexibility, strength, or power situation. There's always going to be room for improvement.
That's really cool. I want to kind of transition into more the performance side. So how does your performance training specifically differ from what you're doing in physical therapy?
Yeah, good question. So, from a logistical standpoint, the coaching that we do is semi private. So, there can be three clients per one coach at the same time. Our physical therapy is one on one, but both are hybrid style programs. And what I mean by that is, if I have someone coming in for coaching, they'll see me, 2 or 3 times per week, but they have a app where I upload their at home program to do. And I mean, it's foolproof. That it has reps, it has sets, it has videos, it has instructions, and it's the same thing with physical therapy. We use the same platform. The only difference is with physical therapy, that's their home exercise program. That's not their, remote workouts.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, even with rehab patients and clients, like we still do all of the data tracking, the force plates, the velocity based trainers, the timing gates if appropriate. I mean, it's all data driven. The real only difference is the logistics of how it's delivered.
Gotcha. So when you're looking at like this performance and having people come in that want to improve in their sport, what are some of the key components that you see that separate a good athlete from an elite athlete?
A couple of things. I mean, the first thing is their athlete profiling. So, with all of our data tracking, what we do is we create an athlete profile. That's really just a fancy term for determining, are they more elastic, or are they more force dominant, or are they somewhere in the middle? We have this wide spectrum of what we call athleticism. On one side are your rubber band elastic type athletes, like your gymnasts, your soccer players, and your baseball pitchers. And on the other side, you have like your really force dominant athletes, like your offensive and defensive linemen. So depending on the sport, we have to find what is the right place in that spectrum that the athlete fits in. So that's the first thing. I guess the second thing would be, what is their mentality and how do they approach the session? Um, are they are they thinking about what they're doing in the present, or are they thinking about what they're doing and how it's going to help them in the future? Are they willing to come in early if I don't have any afternoon time slots? Are they doing their workouts at home? Are they following our nutrition advice? Um, are they keeping track of their sleep? Are they keeping track of, you know, how their bodies are feeling and how they're recovering? And the biggest thing for me, honestly, is, are they willing to train in season? I think that's something that, like, I'm just super passionate about, because I really think in season training needs to be normalized. And the biggest thing that I'm seeing right now is just like struggling to convince athletes that they should train in season. Um, I can certainly understand, like, from a parent standpoint, they're worried about like overuse, they're worried about exhaustion, and the timetable. But in reality, it's just going to keep them healthier. It's going to keep them on the field or on the court longer, and it's going to help prevent injuries if it's at least a decently written in-season program.
Yeah, so I do want to go back because you mentioned like nutrition and sleep. Um, in your role, how do you incorporate some of those other aspects of like staying healthy? Um, and I mean, because obviously, if you're working with an athlete and they're trying to perform at their very best, those things are crucial. So how do you talk about that with them? How do you kind of incorporate it in your program that you're providing them?
We establish what are called non-negotiables. So what that means is, what are the things that you absolutely must do on a daily basis? For the nutrition piece, it always depends on if the athlete's male or female, because that's certainly important. It can get a little tricky talking to opposite sex clients with nutrition, and especially in the society that we live in today, it can get tricky. Um, and there's also a point of diminishing return where if you're talking to an athlete that's a little too young to grasp the things that we're talking about, you're just wasting your time, and you're probably just creating more confusion. So it always depends. Again, it's one of those things that I try to determine in the beginning, like, where is this person in terms of their emotional, mental, and physical investment in this? If they're invested, then I have them full blown tracking their food. I'll check it every single week, and then we make little adjustments week by week to improve it. Um, for those that maybe aren't as invested, we just establish those non-negotiables. So it could be hydration, it could be just simply getting a multivitamin to take on a daily basis. Um, and I mean, sleep. For me, sleep is really important. I'm a Whoop fan, so I always wear my Whoop. It's a shameless plug for me, but I just think that, again, it's data. You cannot argue with data, so I'll always encourage clients to get a step tracker, get some way to track their sleep, and we just kind of full circle use all of that information to determine, how hard are we going to go in this training block, and then, what are some things that we can do to improve down the road.
Yeah, I love how holistic the approach is. Like, understanding that all of those things are impacting even what you're doing is Amazing. I am also a fan of Whoop, and I think it's so interesting once you start using something like that, how much data. Like, I also really appreciate the data piece of like actually understanding where I'm at, because I was quickly humbled when I first started wearing my Whoop, by like the quality of my sleep, or even sometimes how much sleep I was getting.
Mm.
But it's so important to be aware of those things, because then you can make a plan going forward and kind of figure out what needs to be changed. um, I want to ask about mental performance, because that's kind of more of my interest. So how does mental performance play a role in your training of athletes?
It's huge. If you spend any time in my facility, you'll hear me say, be where your feet are. And with all of these distractions and being pulled in 1,000 different places, sometimes our minds are everywhere but where our bodies are in the present moment. And I'd like to consider myself a pretty intuitive guy, so I can kind of tell when someone's having an off day, or I can tell when something's going on. I have a great relationship with every single one of my clients, so I have no problem asking, like, something's off today. Why don't we talk about it for a minute? Let's take a step back, and let's just talk. Let's just have a conversation. And oftentimes, what it'll come down to is like, okay, you know, this this next hour, the 45 minutes that we have left, that's not going to make that problem go away. It's not going to solve anything. And as a matter of fact, what you do in here can down the road change the outcome of whatever issue that you have. So let's just let it go. Let's just be here. Just be here for the next hour, and then we'll worry about the other stuff later on. And I think that's not said often enough, especially with kids in middle school and high school. Because their distractions are like a reward for them. So just telling them like, hey, let's just be here. Forget about that for 45 minutes. Let's just focus on the task that you have in front of you. The task that you have in front of you is hitting this 40 yard dash sub 5 seconds, or it's this number in force output on your counter movement jump. Like, that's the task at hand. Let's just accomplish that task, and then let's move on to the next one. We're just going to knock it out like dominoes, bang bang bang, now on to the next, on to the next, on to the next. And then couple sets in, they're totally different. Their demeanor is totally different, their attitude is totally different. um, they're more engaging, they're more responsive, and man, they smile too, right? Like, it's such a big difference when you just have that perspective shift with them. So there's not too much I can do as a PT and strength coach. Like, I'm not a sports psychologist, I'm not a therapist, even though those lines are grayed very often. um, but for me, I'm just a firm believer in everything that you do to your best ability. And if you just focus on that, the results will come. If you just focus on what is within your control, whatever you dream of having, it's eventually going to come. It's just a matter of how persistent are you in doing those things.
Yeah, I think that's just even like kind of preparing your athletes for that. Like, if you're going through something tough, like, this is how we're going to get to the next, just 45 minutes of our workout. Like, this is how we're going to adjust. Just being aware of it, I think, is so key, even if it's not some major thing, that they're that you're offering, I guess, in that sense of like what, say, a sports psychologist would do in that moment. But like, the awareness, I think, is just huge. My coach used to tell us to write down, like, if we were having, I mean, this was when I was in college, so we just had a lot going on. But she would say, write down the things that you're stressed about, or the things you still have to do, or that you're worried about, on a piece of paper, put it in an envelope, put it in your locker, and then come to practice and know that those things are going to be there when you come back. Like you're
Yeah.
completely getting rid of it, and just separating it, because it's crazy how different you can perform when you're fully invested in the performance and not in those outside things, which,
Hmm.
even as kids, you could be stressed about something um, that seems little to other people, but it could be just completely consuming your thoughts and impacting that performance. So I think that awareness is super, super key. Um, so I know you've talked a little bit about this, but I want to ask, how do you motivate and encourage your athletes? So, especially with like the performance training, what are kind of your approaches for motivation?
So during our initial evaluation or consultation, we very clearly outline goals and intentions. And more specifically, why are they deciding to pursue whatever their sport is? Because we don't do any skills training. We don't do any sport specific skills type of work. We simply just do their strength and conditioning and rehab. So to take time out of their schedules to come do this for multiple hours per week, it tells me that there is some sort of larger goal that, whether they realize it or not, they want and they desire. So the first thing is just determining what is that goal and what are the roots of that goal. Is it external pressures from, your dad and your older brother who were college athletes? Is it trying to keep up with your peers? Is it a confidence thing? Whatever it is, we try to really determine what that is during our initial consultation. And then it's just subtle reminders throughout the process. I'll One of the things that we do that I don't know of any other strength coaches that do this unless they're affiliated with a school or with a professional organization is we'll go to their games. We'll take the time out of our calendars. We'll block off our schedules to go see our kids play. And I think that does a couple of things. I mean, for one, as a performance coach, it does a lot more than what you can assess within the confines of your facility, because it takes away pretty much anything that is unexpected, right? When you're training with a coach, everything has expectations and limitations. When you go onto the field or onto the court, it's totally random. You never know what's going to happen next. So that's number one. The second thing is it shows the athlete that we're just invested in them as they are in us, and that creates a mutual sense of trust and confidence in each other. So I think that that does a lot for them because it just shows that they have a bigger support system than they think.
That's so cool. How does discipline play into it? Like how, obviously these kids, if they're investing in themselves, there has to be a sense of discipline to put in work on their own as well. And even for the rehab, how can you, I guess, ensure that they're going to be disciplined, or is there any kind of conversations that you have about that accountability to themselves and the discipline that they have to pursue what they are with you?
At the end of the day, I tell them that the results are a pretty much a product of the choices that they make. And it's just that simple. If they want to do something, if they make the right choices, in other words, if they focus on what's in their control and choose to focus on those things, then the results will come. I think a lot of times they'll get distracted by maybe slower progress or a setback here or there. And what I'll always say is like, hey, this is just another choice that you have to make. So I think that certainly helps. The other thing too is just keeping them accountable, which is one thing that we're able to do through the software that we use. We can see when they're tracking their food. We can see what they're weighing. We can see when they do their workouts. We can see all of those. It's really full circle with everything that we're able to see. And if, like 10 years ago, I don't know how I would have been able to track all of this stuff, but thankfully, we have the things that we have now to do so.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about the importance of accountability because obviously it seems like it's a big part of your practice is trying to reach these goals and that data. But if especially if these kids are anyone doesn't know how to keep track of it, or someone doesn't have someone pushing them to keep track of it, it can be kind of difficult to actually see those results. So um, do you have anything else like on accountability? What do you see as the importance?
I used to, as a kid, I used to have like a little sign next to my bed, and it said something along the lines of like, someone right now is working for the position that you're in. And for some reason, like that always just lit me up. So, I'll say certain things like that, where like every time you slack off on a set, anytime that you cheat yourself, anytime that, you're not making the choices that you should be making to achieve the goals that you set out to achieve, someone else is going to do it. Like that's the brutal world of sports. It's built around this idea of competition where if you're not good enough, someone else will be. And it sounds cruel and unforgiving, but that's how we have winners and losers. It's just how it works. And I love sports because there's just so many parallels to life. There's no such thing as winning or losing in life, depending on who you ask, but you can tell who are the people that are winning and who are the people that are not.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, as we're kind of getting to the end of our conversation, I do want to touch a little bit on faith because that's a big piece of my story. And it's been pretty unique actually to have a lot of people on the podcast who are Christians. So I'm curious how your faith impacts the way that you coach athletes.
It's everything. I I was always I was born and raised Catholic. I have always been religious my entire life. I actually just had a second baptism a few weeks ago, believe it or not. And it's everything to me. I mean, we have founding principles of our company, and the first one is that everything that we do is to advance the kingdom of God. And I firmly believe that the unique gift that God has granted me is being able to serve the people that we serve. I approach it in a very different perspective than I think most coaches do, um, and most healthcare workers too. I think that there is a lot of entitlement in the healthcare industry. I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of burnout in the healthcare industry. But I'm going to be really honest, and this is probably going to be a little confrontational for most people, but I think burnout is a mental choice that we make. I think if you're in healthcare, you're in it to serve other people. And I went through a period in my career where I was looking for more benefits, I was looking for more pay, I was looking for more time off. And the more of those things that I got, the more empty I felt. And what I realized was that when I felt my best was when I woke up every day and decided that, like, this day is not for me. This day is for me to give to other people. Um, and that's just a very Christian thing to believe. And most people won't agree with it. Most people are going to say, that BS about, oh, you got to make sure your cup is filled before you fill other people's. And For me, God fills my cup, and no matter how tired I am, no matter what I have going on in my own life, and trust me, being a business owner is really stressful. I always have more to pour out, and that's just my mentality. That's not a reflection of how I feel or how tired I am. That's just my life. So I think my relationship with God and my belief system is the main reason why we've been so successful so fast, and why we're going to be the biggest thing in our industry in the Northeast. I can promise you that, just for that reason, because anyone that works for me, we're going to have a service-based approach.
Yeah.
I've already hired and fired two people because they did not have that attitude. They were in it for themselves, and I said, you know what? There's no room here for your ego, and there's no room here for, this self-imposed limitations on what you can bring to the table.
Yeah, and that's so special, I think, because I even recently I've been talking with friends about this idea of like provision and like when you have that approach of like I know that this is not mine. Like everything that I'm doing is for the kingdom of God. The provision comes, like God is going to provide. And so I think, even talking about like the burnout situation, like if you are truly just running after what God wants for you, you're going to be able to be filled like by him in order to serve those that you want to serve. Like if you're just doing it for yourself, you're probably going to experience a lot of emptiness and isolation and issues, but once you shift that view to like this eternal perspective of like this is my why really matters in this world, like it just seems like things fall into place. And it sounds like especially for your practice like you're seeing success because of that approach and just the way um, you're serving others too, and I'm sure people also recognize that. Like even it's interesting because even if someone's not a believer, there's often this experience of like something is different with that person. Like there's something.
Yeah.
So I'm sure just in even talking to you, like with your practice, there's something different. It's set apart because of that approach. So I think that's just so cool that you have that approach and that, your faith is at the forefront because most people would agree it impacts every single thing that you do. But I know it can be hard in sports to have that be such a you know upfront thing, but yeah, super super valuable. I want to give you a chance if you have anything else to add before we finish up with our last question that everyone gets to answer.
Okay. Yeah, I think hopefully this helps some people that are listening, but what really helped me make that shift was I was talking with a preacher that I met at some random church service that I went to with a few buddies of mine, and he just read my mail. I mean, I walked in and he just started talking to me, and like he just absolutely like rocked my world with some of the stuff he said. And of course, it was on a day where I was like really tired. I told my buddies, I was like, nah, like not tonight. It's far away. I got to get up early. All the excuses that seem justifiable. But he said this to me, and he said, you know that God gave you this gift. Why would he give it to you for you to be selfish with and not give to other people? And for me, it sounds so simple, but it was so profound at the time. And I realized that like the way I see it is that this life is not about me. This life is about what I can provide to other people. Um, so that just that little question that he asked me, why would God give you this gift for you to keep to yourself? Um, it doesn't make sense. I mean, it's just quite it's illogical to say the least. So that was the biggest thing for me. So hopefully someone who heard that is like, okay, I get it now.
Yeah, no, that's so awesome. So we're going to end with the last question, the question that everyone gets on the podcast. The name of the podcast is Authentic Performance. So I want to know, what does it look like for you to live authentically?
Yeah, for me to live my life authentically, it's living by the principles that I set for myself and that I set for my company. I won't name all of them, but I'll just name a few. So number one is everything is to advance the kingdom of God. Number two, accept that you will always be the underdog. Um, and then number three, everything that we do, we approach with humility.
I love that. So good. So wise to live by. And it's cool that that is your company's kind of direction, but also that you're following that in your life. I think that is what makes your practice so authentic, is that they're completely together. So thank you so much for being here. This was a great conversation, and I know that a lot of people are going to really benefit from it. So thank you again for taking time out of your day to be here. And yeah, I just really look forward to getting to share this with people.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. We would love to hear what you found valuable in this episode. So please DM us on Instagram at Authentic Performance or leave a review. They're super, super helpful for us. We're so thankful that you're on this journey with us and want to invite you to be a part of the Authentic Performance fam. You can check out more of how we're supporting athletes at theauthenticperformance.com. Also, let us know what you want to hear on the podcast next, or who you want to hear. We appreciate your feedback and want to give you the best possible resources and support. In the meantime, think about how you can live authentically. See